I used to call funny things, but it's she's gonna cry until I tell her that I never wrong. So Chattanooga choo-choo, won't you choo-choo me home?
Douglas's writing, the first time I was introduced to it was, I opened the script, great big script package, which every actor adores, and these 6 scripts came out, and I just couldn't put them down. They were just brilliant. And he was just at that point on, Hitchhiker's had its first sort of radio series out. That had a big cult following. I was a great fan. And so I was in awe of Douglas. Even though he was about 4 years older than me, I was in awe of Douglas. Big, tall Douglas with his great big long nose.
Shada was put together very fast by Douglas, replacing, I think, another 6-parter which didn't come up to scratch.
Douglas had severe problems with writer's block at times. And so sometimes when you write at top speed, something marvellous comes out of it. And it looked like something marvellous. I certainly enjoyed my bits in it, and I was often very, stroppy about the script.
He'd written this in his original college, and I thought that was a really brilliant idea. What he'd done was write a story of him going, or Doctor Who, going back to his college, which happened to be St John's here in Cambridge, going to see his old professor, who, when nobody was looking, would shut the doors, turn the bookcases around, and it became a TARDIS, and the rooms would fly through space. Well, I thought that was a brilliant idea.
He was very specific about Cambridge because he'd been a student here himself. He knew exactly where he wanted the locations, exactly where, and then that was very easy for us, really, providing we could get permission.
The director, who I had worked with before on other projects, was wonderful, Pennant Roberts. He was great with the cast. He had a huge rapport with Tom Baker.
He would help you if you were having trouble. He was fun, and he always made it light, but at the same time, he knew what his vision was with the show.
Pennant Roberts worked with quite a few times. I think he worked on Blake 7, it might have been Survivors, Tenko, always very pleasant, always got a smile on his face, and never made a drama about anything.
Going to Cambridge to shoot a film was so much more interesting than going to yet another quarry or a factory or something like that.
I'd never been to Cambridge before. Had led such a sheltered life in Bristol, but no, I'd never been. I'd been to Oxford, but I hadn't been to Cambridge. And I just fell in love.
I had read Jude the Obscure, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll go up there and enjoy it, and it's such a beautiful place to go.
It was a time of year when, the light was wonderful, weather was really kind, and we were all staying on location, and we all bonded so well, and Cambridge just was the backdrop to the most glorious week of filming I'd had, ever.
Vic and I went up with Pennant and Ralph Wilton to Cambridge to get the feel of some of the sets that we would require, the professor's room and the laboratory. And then we went to King's College to look at the professor's room just to get the feel and the style, what sort of props they would have. We noticed that many of the rooms were scruffy piles of books, and that suited the character that we had in the script. We recreated it in the studio, not exact, but as the style of.
We arrived on the Sunday. I met Pennant and Tom at the hotel where Tom was staying, and we were then discussing the next day's shooting, which was going to be punting. And Tom was, much more keen to go and have fun. And so he wasn't very keen on the idea of practicing punting, which is what he was supposed to be doing.
Tom assured us, of course I can punt, actors do that. Of course I can ride a horse. Of course I can ski.
So we turned up the next day, all ready to go with punting, excited, wonderful weather, beautiful day, and wow, And it was chaos, absolute chaos. And I was in a separate boat with Pennant and the crew, I think. And so we were trying to, this boat was trying to manoeuvre in the right place. And Tom's punting wasn't great. And Lala, I think, was getting a bit fed up. And the whole day seemed very long.
The thing is, it's much better afterwards to say it was terribly difficult and that people were afraid I would drown. It is true, I'm frightened of water and everything like that. It's also true because of those bloody idle students up there, bored to death with theology or whatever it is they're studying there, suddenly seeing a pretty girl in a punt with a guy in a strange costume punting along and having to lose the punt pole at a critical moment. And the pole... So every time I lost the pole, the students roared with utter contempt as they thought, what a tosser. It was terribly humiliating because I wanted to stop and say, listen, excuse me, cock. But it wasn't like that, so I had to put up with the terrible derision,
So the next thing that we had to do were sequences with Dan on the bike. And a little bit of history here is that Dan hates bikes. I'm sure he won't admit it, but he absolutely hates bikes. He's terrified of them.
Pennant told me that, I'd be riding the bicycle, which I obviously said was, one of my many skills.
So I was in the camera car with Pennant, and we were trying to drive through the streets where there was a lot of people, a lot of interest in what we were up to. And Dan was wobbling around on his bike, pretending that he was enjoying it, which I think secretly he probably wasn't at all.
What was tricky was that I was trying to make sure that the camera could get me and that I wasn't going to sort of hold them up by stopping at the sort of give way. So I just went straight across, thinking that, filming's going on, everybody would know, so they would just stop. And of course, as I just get across, you can see in Shada, I just get across in the sort of long shot, and a car goes like that. And I remember looking and thinking, that would have been absolutely tragic. My first Doctor Who, and here I am, dead on the floor in Cambridge.
But we got through it, so it was fun. It was fun. It's great fun, yeah.
On many films that I've made, television things, if you're on location, sometimes there's a bit of romance in the air.
There was a girl who was the production assistant who obviously did continuity as well and taking the shots down. It was called Olivia Bazalgette, and I thought that was far too complicated a name. And most people called her Ollie, but I didn't want to call her that either, so I called her Liv Bag, which seemed very childish now, but at the time was very funny.
And I began to become aware that there might be a little romance going on between her and lovely Dan Hill.
Dan was mad, completely mad. We had great fun. He was just such fun to be with. And as the week went on, it got quite stressful, but he was a live wire and fun. And we really hit it off.
And that was lovely because, it added a bit of spice and a bit of fun, a bit of romance. Why not?
Cut to 2 years later, and Olivia and I are very, very happily together. And we end up being Mr. and Mrs. Hill and have 3 kids, and we've been together since that day.
One of the charming pleasures was meeting Jerry Campion, an actor, a little dumpy fella with big spectacles, and who was the original Billy Bunter in a British BBC television series.
He was exactly the same as you see him on the screen.
Were you addressing me?
It was like Ronnie Corbett with a bit more veracity. He had a fantastic sense of humour, very bright, and he was a great restaurateur.
He had a club called Jerry's off Shaftesbury Avenue. Some raucous drinking went on at Jerry's pub.
I mean, then, the pub's shut at 11 o'clock. Jerry Campion's place, stayed open till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I think Tom was a big regular as well. And so Jerry was thrilled that he'd had this break back into television, and he just couldn't understand why he'd been away from it for so long. But I think what he does on Shada is terrific.
The chase sequence, when I was going to be followed around by that ridiculous ball, was supposed to be shot at night. We had 2 crews to pick up different points because there was a lot of cycling around, and that was a good idea to have 2 crews.
With any chase sequence, you want to move from location to location to develop the chase. And I'd said, well, the only way I can do that in a night, I said, is if I have 2 lighting crews, which was unheard of.
Our base was the pub which all the students used to go to at St John's College. It's called the Baron of Beef. So there we were at about 11 o'clock at night. The shooting was supposed to start at 12. And 5 minutes before midnight, the chief electrician came up to me and he said, Ralph, I don't know how to break this to you. I said, what? I said, has something broken down? He said, no, I'm afraid the filming's been cancelled. And I was just, it was like hitting me in the stomach. I said, but look, we've got all these lights. I've got all this arranged by the police. We can't just, I said, well, it's not us, nothing that you've said. It's official, we're on strike.
In '79 we were still having strikes, but we were quite used to them by now. Unions had dropped strikes at the drop of a hat.
There was an ongoing dispute at Ealing, which was, I think, to do with the grading claim of the film charge hands, the gaffers who were looking after the lighting crews. And each day then there would be a random strike. And because, of course, we had 2 crews out, they were nominated that the gaffer had to go back to Ealing that day, leaving us then with no ability to shoot at all at night.
And we were just flabbergasted. So Pennant, who was always brilliant at thinking on his feet, said, well, we'll just have to do it tomorrow in the daylight. Can you arrange this? Well, this was midnight. He wanted us to start, I think, at 11 o'clock the following morning. So I was on the phone like crazy to the police. And they said, well, you do realise that it's market day in Cambridge. I thought, oh, gosh. But what has to be done has to be done. So it was all arranged to be done at 11 o'clock. In the meantime, because it was such a disaster for us, Pennant and I were having a few drinks just to get over it all. And one of the boys pulling pints overheard the conversation and he said, oh, he said, are you doing it tomorrow then? I said, yes. He said, oh, where are you doing it? And I said, well, we'll be in King's Parade doing a sequence of Doctor Who being chased on his bicycle by this silver balloon. He said, oh, can we be in it then? And by now, you know, Pennant and I were just so stunned by the whole affair. Pennant just said, oh, yes, can do it tomorrow.
So we all trooped off to the appointed location, which is a lamppost outside Trinity Hall College. And lo and behold, as we turned into the street, sure enough, there was the BBC team there, all set up and everything.
Half a dozen St John's College boys, all wearing their red and white scarves, said, we're here. And I turned to Penn and said, oh my God. I said, you remember last night in the pub? And he said, yes. He said, you remember you said to this chap they could be in it? He said, yes. I said, well, sorry, Pennant, but here they are.
And this close harmony arrangement we did of Chattanooga Choo Choo was something that we knew off by heart and done many times before. So it was easy enough just for us to stand around the lamppost as instructed, start singing, and then sure enough, moments later, Tom Baker whizzed by on a bicycle, apparently being chased by a grey spheroid object, if I remember rightly.
So we've been on location for a week, and you know, when you're on location, it's sort of instant family. But there was something really special about it.
We all felt elated. We'd actually got through it, and we felt a huge sense of achievement. We were all very happy. We were all excited to move on to the rehearsal stage and to the studio blocks, and there was a wonderful camaraderie.
We were all absolutely certain that A, it was going to be unique because of the location, and B, Tom and Lala were, you know, firing on all cylinders, and the show itself was going to look just grand.
Everybody was on a high, very much looking forward to the studios to come.
When we got back, we had to then pick up the very intense rehearsals, the extremely wordy rehearsals, because then entered the character Chronotis, played by an immensely distinguished elderly actor, Dennis Carey.
Oh, Doctor! How splendid to see you.
You too, Professor.
This is Romana.
Oh, delighted, delighted. I've heard so much about you.
Have you really?
Well, not yet, but I will have done.
I think Dennis brought something to the show which was totally unique. It was a great foil for Tom and Lala, and for me, and for Victoria Burgoyne, who played my sort of girlfriend in the actual show. And he was just brilliant. And he managed to bring that sort of vagueness, and you just never stopped believing that he was who he was. And from the moment he opened his mouth at the read-through, when we read all 6 scripts, he was just it.
When I was on the river, I heard a strange babble of inhuman voices, didn't you, Romana?
Yes.
Oh, undergraduates talking to each other, I expect. I'm trying to have it banned.
No.
So we had a very successful time rehearsing in rehearsal studios, and then came to the actual filming of the interiors in the television studios.
Block 1, everybody's terribly excited. I was very nervous. It was my first studio as a producer assistant, terribly excited.
That went fairly well. I mean, not unusually, one got behind on day 1 and tried to catch up, and then sometimes asked for maybe, can we please have an extra half an hour to finish it off? So more or less, we did it, and nothing dramatic happened during that first block of interior filming in the studios.
We'd finished block 1, and that had gone very well. I think there were a couple of things they needed to pick up on block 2. Carried on rehearsing, and we got to Television Centre again. I think we were in TC6 now, and got there. And the first morning went well. We camera rehearsed, went through all the scenes in the lab, and they all seemed good. Things looked great. And then Pennant said, OK, let's break for lunch. Went away, had a quick bite to eat, came back, and the doors to the studio were locked.
We were prevented from getting into the studio, and then that was the kind of, to quote a Doctor Who story, that was the seeds of doom, it really was. That was terribly sad,
We were told that the strike had hit us and that we weren't going to be able to record that day and probably not the whole weekend.
Purely from a performer's perspective, it's like your first night. Every time you go into studio, what you've rehearsed at North Acton or wherever, that's your first night. So your adrenaline is pumping from the moment you get into studio, you're made up, and here you are standing outside the doors when you're just about to record, and someone has basically said, you're barred. And it's devastating, because you just stare at the doors and say, well, can't somebody just get a crowbar and open them? This is ridiculous. We're just here to do a job.
Pennant held everybody together. He was trying to be very positive and telling us that it wasn't the end of the world, that it was all going to be fine. But I think we all knew that it wasn't good news, seriously wasn't good news at that point.
We'd lost the second block, so Pennant, never being one to give up easily, and that's putting it mildly, he was a fighter. Charming, but he was a fighter. He said, OK, we're going to get this done by hook or by crook somehow. The only way we can do it is to combine the second block and the third block, race our way through it and do it in one fell swoop. So we all thought, well, if Pennant says it can be done, it'll get done.
We now in North Acton were carrying all of the second studio block's material and all of the third block's material. And the last day that we were in North Acton, we ran what was really the whole of Shada. We ran it, and it was extraordinary. I mean, it lasted for hours, and it was great. And everybody just turned around and said, this is such a great, great show.
So we were ready to go, and we heard that the strike was over. Fantastic, it was all going to happen. We were so thrilled, so excited. But the sets weren't built, and we couldn't understand what was going on because we were in what was happening.
And so when it came to the priority, other shows edged us out.
And so we were shunted down the queue and we never got completed.
The absolute final crunch came middle of December. We were still hoping against hope that we'd finish it somehow, but the absolute no, with exclamation marks, came from those on the 6th floor.
When I found out that the show had been officially cancelled, I was in the Bar and Television Centre and I bumped into someone. They said, you know, it's been cancelled. And I said, no. And they said, yep, it's gone. And you search for reasons. You search for, you know, was it because it was Graham's last show? Was it because, you know, a new broom was coming in and, you know, getting rid of the old? It just seemed crazy.
And we were devastated, actually, devastated.
The lab set, which we never saw on camera, would have been broken down. All the props would have been returned to prop houses, and the scenery would have been taken back to a contract and stored until we could remount it. But of course, it will cost money to keep a huge amount of stock in storage. And after some months, I should imagine it would have all been put back into stock, broken down and reused.
Pennant wrote to all the actors because he was a very caring man. He wouldn't have had to write to me, although I do remember getting some sort of a card, because obviously they had to tell the leading people that it was all off. And that was a terrible downer. I mean, really a terrible, terrible downer.
Pennant is a very kind, emotional, paternal man and director. And I think he was absolutely heartbroken. I noticed there was a quote from something that Pennant said. He said, you know, for me it was just 6 months down the drain. And that's true. It's 6 months of your life invested in this show not being transmitted.
The show was ending incomplete, and Douglas was hurt, and so was Pennant, and so was Graham Williams, because it was Graham's last show, and it was Douglas Adams' last show. It wasn't my last show by any manner of means. So there was that kind of disappointment. The other thing that was very disappointing to know how to handle was that it meant that Graham was going out on a failure. It meant that John Nathan Turner was taking over because a failure had, you know, kind of rushed it on. And then it came, because at the BBC you have farewell parties. Boy, the BBC farewell parties make you long for death sometimes. But, and so that party, you know, was a bit down. It was extremely difficult for me, because I really, in spite of being difficult at work, I'm rather a sentimental, cheerful fellow, and I didn't want it to be down, and I wanted Graham, you know, not to be unhappy, but I couldn't help him to be happy, because I hadn't helped him really in the last stages of running the show. I hadn't helped him much. And I didn't want to risk, you know, saying, listen, I'm terribly sorry about the past, and I'm terribly sorry about Shada, because he might have broken down, I don't know, or I might have done. I'm a great sobber when there's grief in the air.
We realised it would take some time for the series to be completed and broadcast. What we all did, I think, was tell families and friends, right, okay, the next series of Doctor Who, we're going to be on it, we're going to be on it. And so each time, you know, we'd make sure we watched the first episode and thought, oh, I can't see how this is going to fit in. So it's going to be the next series, it's going to be the next series. No, this can't be that, that's not right. You know, I can't see how Cambridge is going to fit into this plot line. And this went on for about, I can't remember how many series, but it eventually dawned on us that something must have happened or gone wrong.
I think it's great that people still show this interest in that particular story, perhaps because it was Doug Adams' last, who knows.
Every single week when I was in a theatre job or whether I was on telly, I'd get maybe 4, 5, 6, 10 letters a week saying, what happened to Shada? What happened to Shada? Can you tell us? You know, you were involved, what happened? And I just used to write back and say, look, it was one of those tragic things.
There's something unsatisfying, isn't it? We can't bear incompleteness. We want an explanation or how it would have been, you know?
Perhaps it's like the unfinished symphony. If it had been finished, nobody would have cared that much. But because it's this great mystery hanging, what really happened, that people are still fascinated by the story of Shada.
We thought it was good, excellent, but we'll never ever know, will we? And then when we look back you know, there are all sorts of little sadnesses. You know, Graham then died tragically. Douglas has died since. Several other people, Dennis has died. Lots of people. In fact, you know, I must be the oldest survivor, really, and it can't be all that long for me. But I'm being kind of brave about it, you know.
I used to call funny things, but goodbye. She used to cry until I tell her that I never wrote. So Chattanooga choo-choo, won't you choo-choo me home?